Wonderful. So we're going to do a little bit of introduction and welcome. And I'm actually going to do some slides with this one. I'm Raquel Holmes. I am the founder of the Improv Science Freedom Festival, and I'm a Freedomista, exactly. And the Freedomistas are the organizers who meet monthly and weekly to create the Freedom Festival each year. For those who have been here before, welcome back. Those who are new, welcome. I want to give you a brief introduction to the Freedom Festival, which was started in 2023 as a response to the desire to create through conversation, through playfulness, through celebration, our experience together of freedom and independence. It is a festival that is organized by individuals who say, I want to bring myself or I want to bring my organization to celebrate Juneteenth to July 4th. And so in the next slide, you'll see, because Opal Lee, who championed the Juneteenth becoming a national holiday, she walked 2.5 miles from her place in Texas out to DC. And what she said is, I want there to be a celebration of freedom from June 19th, Juneteenth to the 4th of July. And that would be celebrating freedom. It's also a chance for us to come together. So we're organized by artists, scientists, enthusiasts, people who want to, again, create together and share what freedom and independence means to them. So I'm very excited to bring you to this session, which is Freedom and Independence, Field, Streets, and Stars. And I get to welcome Hakeem Oluyesi to the conversation with us. He has written a memoir called A Quantum Life, which we'll touch a little bit on, not in talking about the book, but just in the experience of what does freedom and independence look like for Hakeem. He is the CEO of the Astronomical Society of the Pacific, and I met him in my new, I wear multiple hats, location at Edion STEM Learning, which is a STEM education research program at Sonoma State. So I'm really grateful for Edion for introducing us to Hakeem. And that concludes our slides. So there are many events that are part of the Freedom Festival. I invite you to go to freedomfestivalusa.org to check out the rest that are still coming. Our conversation with Frederick Douglass tomorrow, as well as an open mic poetry session on the 4th of July as a closing. So with that, before I do say more about Hakeem, again, just welcome. It's good to see you all. So you made it here. I invite you all to just do a little Zoom applause of arriving, of being, yep, and beautiful room over there, Sonoma State. Excellent. And this is going to be a conversation. Excellent. Thank you, Dar. So as you're in your spaces, if you would also practice your fingers, and I know in the conference room it will be hard, but you're invited also to log into the Zoom room and go on mute and whatever, so that you can make use of the chat if you choose. Go ahead and write where you're coming in from. Where you're coming in from. Where are you that you're zoomed into this session? I got Peoria, Arizona, Boston, Mass, Aldi, Virginia, Tahoe, woohoo, Boston, Berkeley, excellent. Sebastopol, New Jersey, lovely. So glad that you're here. So glad that you're here. So I'm going to say a little bit more to introduce Hakeem. Do you feel like saying anything yet before I say more about you? All right, excellent. Hakeem oh, I've been practicing your name, Hakeem Oluyesi. I butchered it.
What?
P. Caddy, the butcher got to my mouth.
Right? You nailed it every time up until now.
Exactly.
Oluyesi.
Thank you. I love mistakes. They invite something new to happen. So, Oluche, thank you so much. born in rural Mississippi, got a bachelor's degree at Tougaloo, Mississippi, which I really appreciate. I learned of Tougaloo because of a SNCC organizer,
Ah,
Charles McDew. So that was one of the places he was. You went on to get a PhD at Stanford in astrophysics, right?
mhm,
And from there, not only did you get a PhD in astrophysics at Stanford, but you pioneered technologies that are in semiconductors, right?
yeah.
You've done pivotal work in astrophysics as a whole. So
Mhm,
you're up there. And you managed space education at NASA for multiple years,
yeah.
right? And not only that, you also then have been part of the Department of State, the US, I don't know, State Department, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Going to different places like Hong Kong,
Right.
India,
Yeah.
representing us. And I first knew of you because I saw you speaking on outrageous acts of science, right?
It's
Because you're
impressive.
you're
Love that.
and yeah, it's a beautiful thing. So you're on the Science Channel, you're a science journalist. Um, and the thing that I think what I'm mostly excited about, Hakeem, other than that you're an energy that matches, if not surpasses my own, um, is you have an attention to people
Mhm, yeah.
and the journey. So your memoir is a gift of your life
Mhm,
coming from rural Mississippi and what it meant to be you,
right.
right?
Yeah.
From
Yeah.
rural Mississippi and to come up through academia to different places, how you found your way. So I want us to move into that um briefly. And I'm thinking, how's my audience doing? How are your ears? Give me some sense of how your ears are. They're perked and peaked. Awesome.
Yay.
Lovely. Um, we've been in conversation just a bit, but like when we're looking at freedom and independence, and we have an hour together, so it's just short. When you we were just talking about this when we were
Yeah.
10, I don't, you ended up reading a book on relativity, Einstein's
Right.
relativity, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what were you doing before you read that book? What was it like to be where you were?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for the question. Thank all of you for joining me this evening. Just so you know, after this, by the way, if you ever want to reach out, pop my name in, I'm on X/Twitter, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. And if you pop my name in Google, you'll find me. But I love to, follow up with people. Um, so as a kid, right, your story comes from your parents, right?
Mm,
And so my family is sort of a nice American story from the deep South.
nice.
So so there's the ethnic side is my father is a Mississippi mulatto, right? His grandfather, both his grandfathers were Irish, Scottish, Irish white men who had families with black women. One of them
Mm,
also had a family with a white woman
yeah,
simultaneously.
yeah.
Um, but in that case, the land that I grew up on was the land that man willed to my family, right? This my great grandfather, and they were all farmers and illiterate for the most. Well, not the white men, but my father and his father were both
Mhm.
illiterate. My father learned to read in his mid 20s. He dropped out of school when he was 9 years old. So, in even though ethnically he's mulatto in Mississippi in the deep South, that subtlety was not taken into consideration. So your identity was black, right? My mother is New Orleans Creole. So her ancestors immigrated from West Africa to France to the Caribbean and then to
Mm,
New Orleans. Um, and my mother and my father divorced when I was 4 years old. And my mother also was a dropout. She didn't finish high school. She graduated, she dropped out at the age of 16. And the men on my mother's side, going all the way back to Samuel Alexander, who first came, they were plasterers up until today, right? So they were, skilled laborers of sort, but again, working class black New Orleans family. At a certain time, my mother's parents divorce, remarry. One parent goes to Los Angeles. All right. So that's where my first cousins are. So when my parents divorced at 4, we go to LA. And this is 1971. And so my cousins were all members of this new social club called the Crips. And uh, for the next decade, I moved every year. And my mother, now that I'm older and I'm had my own encounters with the DSM-5 criteria, I think I understand that my mother most likely was borderline, right?
Mm.
And we moved every year, and it was chaotic and it was violent. I lived in South Central LA. I lived in New Orleans, Ninth Ward, New Orleans East, the area they call the Goose. Back then they called it Gentilly. I lived in South Park in Houston, right? Third Ward. Tough neighborhoods, right?
Mhm.
And, you know, being a single dude, being a son of a single mother, she was often working. And not only that, I'm Generation X. So they was, the daylight rises, get out. you know, so you're out there in the street and you're learning to fend for yourself. And, um, you're easy to victimize as a child out there, right? So a lot of people, so what it did for me is it really gave me a sort of, how do I say, you know, wariness of humans.
Yes.
And whereas most humans would bond with other humans, I bonded with books, right? And so amidst the chaos, every time I go to a event and there are older people who knew me as a child, they would always say, amidst the chaos, there you would be in a corner with a book, right? And
Oh,
so
admit I thought you were saying Mr. Chaos, but it's like amidst it, in the middle of it,
amidst the
you were in the
chaos,
book.
yeah, yeah. Like there
Yeah.
was a lot of, my mother's LA family would get together. There was a lot of pop the trunk moments, right? There, some conflict would break out. Or I'm gonna go, pop the trunk. Mean they were gonna go get their weapon, right? And then the other person flees
Oh,
the scene, right? But that was pretty regular.
right.
My father was a big entrepreneur before his time, right? His business is now legal in 36 states, but at the
Yeah,
time,
it was not.
it
Yeah,
it wasn't. And I started working my dad's business from the age of 9,
right.
right?
Yeah.
And so ultimately, my older sister Andrea, who's only, I don't have any full siblings. I have a half. My father had 3 wives and children outside of marriage before he married my mother. And so my older sister, she, when I was around 10, the same time, my dad's house was robbed and she was shot, right?
No.
Yeah, shot, and she survived. She was unable to have children, but she went on to be a little mogul in Mississippi and adopted many children that she loved into normalcy because, at the time she was adopting them, we were like, these kids have clearly been through a lot. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And she loved them into normalcy, right? So my life was very, um, it was a crazy childhood. Yeah,
Right.
yeah, yeah.
Did you I'm c one, I'm you tell this story, like, you wrote this story, you've told the
I wrote
story.
it. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm just, I was thinking
And this
about
is like the tip of the iceberg.
exactly.
It's the details are
Yeah.
insane. Yeah.
Well, and it's also because but somewhere in there so let's stay with freedom and independence. Let's just anchor
Yeah.
there, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And there's still this question of like one of the questions I had was you get this book on relativity at some point and
That's right.
you go after it. So
Yeah.
books anchor you
Absolutely.
and are part of that. And then you go after it. And part of that I'm like, well, how did you do that? And the other part is I'm still wondering how our audience is actually hearing you, because I do want to
Yeah.
support this conversation being
Right.
more
Right. Yeah.
than us. And people may not have a question. You might still just be listening, but I'm checking in with you. But
Yeah. Feel free to ask me anything at any time.
yeah, so as it comes up, as things come up, use that chat. That's why I wanted you to write in there ahead. If things come up for you and you want to ask a question, you have a thought, make use of it. Okay.
Mhm, mhm.
Um,
So to answer the story about the book, so what happens is up until the age of 9, I'm interested in children's books. All right. At the age of 9, that year is the first year I moved to Mississippi, where my father's from. And all the males, that are boys, teenagers, and young men have comic books. And I had never had exposure to like crates of comics. So I'm just going crazy.
mm,
And, later in the year, I've gone through all of them. There's nothing left. And there was this book at my home. I'm living with family, Aunt Mitty, and it's the book Roots. And so I decided at 9 years old, I'm going to read it because there's nothing else left to read. And it really blew me away that it was so much more vivid than any other book, right? So this is leading to the Einstein story, right?
Yeah.
So after reading Roots, I realized, oh, let's do this again and again and again. And so the next year we moved to New Orleans to the Ninth Ward, and there are no books. But my mother's older sister, who she was competitive with, purchased a set of encyclopedias and mentioned how that's a necessity when you're raising children. So my mom buys a set of encyclopedias, and I decide I'm going to read them from A to Z. And when I get to E, that's when I encounter Einstein. And that, hey, Darlene, I hear you and see you. Yes. Uh, that's what, I
No,
became obsessed.
Hakeem, I'm gonna read it out just because not everybody reads chat.
Okay.
And Darlene, I'm with you on this one as well. I also grew up in chaos and found grounding in books. Thank goodness for the public library. And in my case, my mom was the librarian, so she would give the
Oh,
book.
you cheated.
Yeah, yeah, I cheated. And actually she was here at Sonoma State at one point, but after my parents got divorced and I was in the single family, then it was also that anchoring was with books, right?
Right.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
So the another question in the chat is, we would like to know if the book contained any math in it. And the answer to that is a resounding yes. But here's the deal. I went to, you heard the neighborhoods I lived in. My schools were not the, bright, shining examples of education in America, right? Particularly in Mississippi. And as a kid who was bookish and read everything I could consume, I had when I took standardized tests, I basically aced everything but math.
Hmm.
On those math exams, I was average at best, right? Once it became beyond just pure arithmetic and simple geometry. I wasn't reading that on my own. But the thing about the relativity math, I vowed to myself that I'm going to force myself to learn it and read it and learn it. And it's sufficiently simple, that I was able to do it. And as a matter of fact, I ended up winning first place in the Mississippi State Science Fair in 1985 by programming, basically modeling relativity. I didn't know that's what it was. Well, the first one, Nick, he asked which relativity book that I start with. It was the encyclopedias. And so when I got to high school, my mother ended up purchasing Encyclopedia Britannica. And, my love for Einstein was so obvious. And, I was talking about it nonstop that, I'd come home from school sometimes. My mom would have gone to either the library in Laurel, Mississippi, or our little library in Heidelberg, found me some relativity books and left them on the dining room table for me. So yeah, there was
Beautiful.
no adult around who knew anything about it. So it was just me and myself down there in the deep woods, you know, being a nerd.
And the thing though, because we talked about you have this saying of I remember the hustle and help, hope,
Hope,
hustle, and
hustle, and
help.
help. Yeah.
And so that part of your mom going, this is something that I see, I don't understand it, but I can keep giving something. Like that's a kind of
Right.
help, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's a yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So Hannah asked a great question. She says, I think somewhere that physics used to be more of a philosophical approach, but math was brought into it later. Absolutely. So that was the problem with it. So the reason why Aristotelian physics dominated for centuries, right, until the time of Galileo, so like 17 centuries, was because it was consistent with all observations, right? And what made Galileo different was he realized when he was doing experiments that in order to get the deepest truths, he had to do experiments in his mind that could never be done in the real world, right? So the simple example is motion. So Aristotle looked at the world around him and is like, look, the natural place for matter is to be at rest. And the only way it moves is if you put a force to it. The bigger the force, the faster it moves. So the speed is proportional to the force. Galileo starts doing experiments and he's like rolling balls down planes, right? And he notices that, if I have two planes that are equal, the ball rolls to just about the same height. If I make the angle of one different, it'll roll a much greater distance because it's still seeking the same height. So what if I made it completely flat, right? It could never get to that height, but it should roll forever. But it didn't roll forever. It stopped. Why did it stop? Friction. So Aristotle, Galileo realized if I make it smoother and smoother, it'll go farther and farther. Then he's like, what if there's no friction, right? Something that would never happen, that it would go on forever. And that's when he realized that the force doesn't determine the speed. The force determines the change in the speed. It's going to keep doing what it's doing unless you apply force to it. Then it's going to change what it's doing, right? So those thought experiments uh, are, that was based not just on, what the Greeks did, speculative philosophy, but based on experimentation. And then after that, you have, you know, Newton come around and he realizes how to take that idea and turn it into mathematics that we call calculus, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. So, yeah, math showed up later.
So, so so we're in this first part of your life and coming from the chaos of the poverty,
Yeah.
right? Working class, at the same time entrepreneurs,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
But in
Yeah.
in
Totally
the
entrepreneurial, totally hustling.
right
Yeah.
on the underground at the hustle. And then you have these books that anchor you and you get to the Einstein and you're delving in, you got your help from your mom in terms
Yeah.
of having resources. In
Right.
this moment, would you say that you had an experience of freedom, or what did it look like for you? What was
Oh
that
yeah.
freedom at
So
that moment?
so at that time, my life was completely dominated by racial dynamics. I live in a completely segregated Mississippi society.
Mhm.
I went to Heidelberg High School, the public school that was all black, except for our junior year. We got one white guy, James Roberts. And then a mile and a half down the road is the all white Heidelberg Academy. And it was the exact same way across town. I'll give you an example. When I moved there and I was going out for spring training football, right, at 13 years old, me and my buddies decide, hey, we're going to meet at the one doctor in Heidelberg, Mississippi, Dr. Parker. And, we're going to meet, say, Tuesday morning at 8, Dr. Parker. So I show up, wait in the waiting room. They never show up. We get back to school and they're like, dude, where were you? And I was like, where were you? I was there. Right. And then we figured out what the mismatch was. I went to the white folks' waiting room. I didn't realize that there was no law saying to do this. The year is 1980, by the way. There was no law saying to do this, but still, the black people went to that one, and we went to here. And the other thing was, throughout my teenage years, I started driving at 15, get my license at 15. You drive through town a couple times at night, you're getting pulled over, right? The number of times, throughout I left at the age of 24. The number of times I had to lie down, get searched, all that thing. It never erupted into violence or anything like that. It was more like a keep you in your place force. Keep you,
Mhm.
let you know, boy.
Yeah.
Um, but and a big event happened for me when I was in college, uh, and this has to do with freedom because a
Yep.
big part of freedom is economics, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And
And this
and
is at Tougaloo?
this is at Tougaloo. This is at Tougaloo. So I'm not doing well academically or otherwise. And as a matter of fact, at this time, I now have a drug addiction, right? I'm addicted to crack cocaine and I dropped out of college. And the job I have is as a janitor at the local hotel, the Ramada Renaissance on County Line Road. It now has a new name. And I'm working as a janitor. I'm making $4 an hour. Can't even get 40 hours a week. When I would show up to work at 3 p.m., I work 3 to 11. One of the first things I would do is walk the halls because when people order room service, they put the tray outside their door when they're done, right? So I would go eat people's leftovers, right? And one day a bellhop gets fired. And I'm like, this is my big break. If I get the bellhop job, I can make $100 in tips in a day on a weekend. Given a particular weekend, I might make $200-300, right? So I apply for the bellhop position, and nope, doesn't happen. And I literally think to myself, I can't go from janitor to bellhop, you know. And I'm just like, this is it. And I'm like, I got to go back to college, and
Mm.
I did. And just when I did, I enrolled in a physics class. And I didn't have a major yet. I thought I was going to be chemistry pre-med. I enrolled in this physics
Mm.
class, and this young woman from MIT shows up named Cynthia McIntyre. She's about to become the second black woman to get a PhD in physics from MIT.
Yep.
And she had started this new conference called the National Conference of Black Physics Students, where the idea was to encourage more African Americans to go into physics. She came to Mississippi, right? And what's funny is is that the chair of physics at Howard today, Quentin Williams, he was at that meeting. He was a Jackson State University student. The chair at Morgan State University today, Willie Rockwood, he was at that meeting, right? So Cynthia left quite the legacy. There's many more. Um, but that's where I learned that physics as a career is a thing, right? And I didn't
Mhm.
realize that by studying so much of Albert Einstein and such as a kid that I had taught myself so much physics. And so physics class was the easiest thing to me. So I was like, yes, this was not the progenitor of NSBP. Nick Gross asked if it was the progenitor of the National Society of Black Physicists. The National Society of Black Physicists had already existed for just over a decade. All right. And that's when Cynthia decided to do this particular meeting. Um, someone asks,
Okay.
several people have experienced or had spouses, family who have experienced segregation even in recent years. Of course. Yeah, it's still a thing, right? It really is. When I went and worked at MIT for a year in 2015, I was like, hey, there's been rumored that there are black folks in Boston, but I can't find none of them. And
Oh,
I ended up meeting this dude who he reached out to me because he watched me on Outrageous Acts of Science.
yes.
He had his name was Jiggy. He's passed since.
Mm.
But he had a podcast called The Paranormal Hood. He was a former bouncer. I don't know. Do you know Jiggy? Because it seems like everybody
No,
knew
I
this
don't.
dude.
I don't.
Yeah.
It's just hearing that paranormal hood sounds
Yeah.
like an interesting podcast.
It was. Yeah. But he took me to Roxbury, right? And
Yeah,
so,
right. And then which is everywhere. And I remember my family
yeah.
going like, this is the most segregated city. And I'm in Sonoma County, which is not
Yeah.
very it segregation looks
Well,
different. It
yeah,
looks different
exactly.
from one place
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
another.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and you're talking about like you're finding your way into physics. And the
Right.
question was the freedom. So you went back
Well,
to Tougaloo.
I'm finding my way into the middle class is what I'm doing. Right.
Yeah.
Because if there's nobody around you who, where I'm coming from, if I'm going to make it in the world, it's going to involve a truck. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? And my
Yeah.
goal is to get me a log truck or get, that's yeah,
So there's so many. So you're saying you're finding your way to the middle class. So this is one of the things I love about the Freedom Festival and also some of the
yeah,
roots of some of the organizers that are in the room is constantly being able to cross, like, because I know Roxbury, Dorchester.
yeah,
I went to graduate
yeah,
school at
Dorchester.
Tufts, which
Yeah.
was over in Chinatown, but then I did youth development work in
Mhm,
Roxbury.
mhm,
And
mhm.
it was that experience of like, wait, here's the Black community and
Right,
here's academia, and we're separated. So how do we keep
right.
bringing people together? Because if you don't come together in a similar space, there's no way to say, hey,
Yeah,
what are you doing? Like there's a
right, right.
happenstance that happens. So
Yeah,
part of your story
absolutely.
I hear is you happen to find the people or the people that found you that
Yeah.
ended extending a hand and you were smart enough or able to take
Or
advantage of
desperate
the
enough.
opportunity. Say it
Yeah.
again.
Or desperate enough. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
And there's a person I left out that was critical. And that is my principal, right? My college principal one day calls me to his office. And I was a because I read everything, and because of the culture of Gen X, I was a practical, joking, jerk of a kid, right? For fun, right? Jerk for fun, not a beating people up jerk, right? So I was always in trouble, right? I'm always talking back to the teacher. I'm always trying to make the class explode in laughter. And so one day the principal calls me, and not to mention I was selling weed at school too. Right? And so one day the principal calls me to his office, Mr. Green, and he's like, I think it's a disciplinary issue. And he was like, son, what are you doing after high school? And I didn't have a plan, but I knew the right answer. And I was like, I'm going to college, right? He's like, oh, really? How are you going to pay for it? And he's like, let me introduce you to someone. And he takes me into his inner office, and in there is the Navy recruiter, Senior Chief Gage. All right. Senior Chief stands up, sticks out his hand, and says, look, the most I can offer you is $20,000 a year. Now, mind you, my brother in law, my sister's husband, by the way, they got married when she got pregnant at 16 and she dropped out of school. I heard my mother bragging. This dude had achieved the glass ceiling at the local factory, right? Howard Industries that makes transformers. And I heard my mother's words. I heard her a few weeks earlier bragging that he had earned 15,000 a year before, and this Navy recruiter just offered me 20. right? So I signed up for the Navy right after my 17th birthday. And so for the next year, while I was still in high school, I had to show up at the Navy recruiting station in Laurel, and I spent a lot of time with Senior Chief. And Senior Chief was like, dude, I'm going to get you something bigger than this. I'm going to find a way to officership for you, right? And he found this program called Boost, which stands for Broadened Opportunity for Officer Selection and Training. And I got accepted in the Boost. And Boost was for people that were from like inner cities, Appalachia, rural America. And it was a pathway for enlisted people to become officers. But they sent you to San Diego and gave you a year of academic training and then an NROTC scholarship. So I went there and they had two math classes, the regular math class and the remedial math class. Guess which one I was in? And by the way, I was valedictorian of my high school class. Guess which math class I was in?
Remedial.
You don't believe in me, Raquel. You know I'm an astrophysicist. What do you mean? Yes,
Which was it?
I was remedial. I was in a remedial class. And this teacher we had, who was civilian, Mr. Galuli, took us from arithmetic through calculus in a single year. He did that every year with the classes, right? I got kicked out of the Navy just as we completed algebra because I have atopic dermatitis, and you're not allowed in the Navy with atopic dermatitis because it impacts readiness. Eventually, they changed the rule that you could be in the Navy, but you just can't serve on ships, right?
Okay.
So I get kicked out of the Navy, right? But now I know algebra, right? So,
Which is fundamental.
which is fundamental. You're going nowhere in
Fundamental.
STEM, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I go back to Mississippi. I'm selling weed. So some of my buddies from high school come back from college, right? These cats who were from Chicago.
Yeah.
Their parents sent them to live with grandma in Mississippi, right? To get them away from the gangs, right?
Yep.
So these dudes knew about college. So they went to Tougaloo College. And they come and they're like, hey, let's go out. We're going to buy some weed from you and take you out, right? And we're sitting around the table. They're like, bro, what are you doing? You're like one of the smartest cats we've ever met in our life. Why are you, come to Tougaloo with us, right? And eventually they convinced me once they told me it was 7-1 female to male. And I went, and I'll tell you a bit of trivia. If you look on your, if you go to Google, put in George Darnell McDonald, Selma, Alabama. Today he's a reporter. Back then he was ICE, and he was our leader. And at Tougaloo, we had a rap.
That was his name? Wait, when you say
ICE. Like Snoop Dogg ain't really Snoop Dogg.
Okay, just
right.
Just given today's climate, I was like making sure what ICE meant. So that was
right. No. His rap name, like Ice T, Ice Cube,
yeah.
ICE, right? So here's the crazy thing is we're there my freshman year at Tougaloo, and this promoter comes from Vicksburg saying, hey, we heard you guys got a rap group. We need an opening act and for this concert in Vicksburg. So I was a DJ, not a rapper. So Ice and Smooth, our other rappers, they got to go. When they got back to campus the next day, we were like, how did it go? And they were like, oh man, they had raps, but no music. They're like, oh, we met this dude. He was so cool. We rapped for him. He made our beats right there on the spot. His name was Dr. Dre. Right. Yeah, this is like 1986, 87, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, so he was with the world-class record crew at the time. So anyway, all these people that showed up on my behalf, right? So, I happened across Einstein. When I'm in high school, these teachers are doing outreach from University of Southern Mississippi. That's how we find out that science fairs exist, right? So I go on to win the state science fair. The Navy guy takes me into the Navy where I learn algebra, right? I come back, my homies are like, hey, come to college. I go to college, Cynthia McIntyre shows up. She's like, hey, there's this thing called physics, right? And then I have a mentor, all these dudes, there were these cats who came to Tougaloo in the 60s for the freedom fight, right?
The Freedom Riders.
Yeah, and they were from Caltech, Harvard, and Cornell. They all are just passing away now, right? There's only one left. We call him Beautiful John. I got to see him a year ago. But two were in chemistry, one was in physics. And so they took me under their wing, right? So Professor McGinnis recommended me for my first research experience. When I didn't have the money to go, he paid my tickets to go there.
So at this point, what's the racial makeup?
Oh, Tougaloo College is all black. So I had a completely segregated life from 13 to 24.
Right, right, right. Because so and I think it's one my experience in organizing, like my years have been in like the Tapia celebration of diversity in computing. Ru-
Oh, I knew Richard.
ru-
I met Richard Tapia very young at those kit conferences. He came to the NCBPS conference.
I'm sure he did. And
Yeah,
so and we or so I was one of the organizers for the first Tapia conference
yeah,
because he created at Rice University that environment where everybody could come and learn and grow together, right? And like just fundamental willingness to commit to people coming from different backgrounds and being able to find a way forward, right? To move
right.
to
Yeah,
move up.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
think I was going to say something
I mean,
completely
you had to be intentional about it, man. No one, I wasn't going to find a way on my own, right?
Yeah,
Someone had to be intentional about going down there and letting us know that this exists and
exactly.
constantly reinforcing it. Yeah,
And I think that's the work over the years. So before we've had diversity, equity, and inclusion, my experience of professionals in the sciences have committed to creating the communities that support people crossing class
yeah, yeah.
and moving up.
And
And it's not the moving, I think it's because I almost didn't want to play that song Moving Up because there's
yeah.
a way we could hear your story as it's about being able to move out of poverty and move away from, a segregated environment.
Well, that's not it. That's not what it was, right? Because I saw it as injustice, right? That's how I struck, when I got to Stanford University. So Nick asked about the transition from undergrad to grad. I get to Stanford University. There's a lot of things that I'm seeing for the first time. And one of the things that I'm seeing for the first time really is class, right? Class differences. And I'm like, once I get to know these cats and I'm talking to them and what their life was like, I'm like, I was blown out of the water before this race even started, right? Three of the guys in my PhD group, their fathers were PhD physicists. I was like, and not average PhD physicists. And I'm just like, bro, how in the world could I have, but I had to work my butt off. But the thing was, I'm like, yo, I got to do something about this. So from day one of, or year two of my time, I was constantly volunteering for various programs, going to high schools. So the one of the places that I tutored was the high school that's in the movie Dangerous Minds, right? When Michelle Pfeiffer with Julio made the
Mhm.
theme song, right? These were kids from East Palo Alto, right? I tutored math at that school. I did a program from these Hunters Point kids. Let me tell you, that was rough too. A few of them, I was young and fit, some little 10-year-old stepping up to me.
Yeah.
I'm like, kid, what? Right? But that was their mentality, right? And so, I just knew I had to do something about it. I knew that I had a unique view and understood how to transition from one place to the other.
You also we talked about earlier this experience of when you're going, I've got to make it, I got to work hard. And then part of being able to stay, my experience of
Oh yeah.
being able to live in academia and it's an
Oh yeah.
interesting class experience, right? Mine's
Oh yeah.
not yours. Mine's like working class, middle class, but I
Yeah.
still experience it. But is oh Raquel, you get lost in your words.
Academia elitism.
Right?
That- yeah.
But you spoke about my people. That's the thing I'm trying to get
Uh,
to, is that experience of like I'm more comfortable on the street corner than I
oh yeah.
am in academia.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
that and at the same time, so if you could say a little bit more about like what that moment was and what my people has become, because I think that's an important both in the sense of class, but also of what it means to build community.
Yeah. 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 Well, I now that I'm older, right, I do
Mm,
realize the ways that my expectations contributed to some of my difficulties, right? When
for
people
sure.
treat you a certain way in the world, you're expected to be treated a certain way. So there are both nefarious actors, right? There are people that treat you badly, but at the same time, there's other times where you just expect to be treated badly and you don't even give them a chance, right? Um, and I did a lot. I did that, right? I did that. I segregated myself in some ways, right? Uh,
Sure.
because it was painful. It was painful. Um, I forgot what you asked me but I ran
I'll
straight to East Palo Alto when I got to Stanford, right? I was hanging out in the
no.
hoodiest hood I could find.
And so the story was something like, and it felt comfortable there, and yet
Oh,
also that you're like, this doesn't work.
oh, I remember the story I told
Yeah.
you. So this happened. So I was married when I showed up. I got married at 21. We divorced when we were 30. Uh, that story's in the book. We're still family to this day, right? It's good, best divorce ever. So we go there, and both of us felt like fish out of water, right? At least I'm a nerd, right? But she wasn't, and so it was even rougher on her. But after a couple of weeks of being among my peers in physics grad school, I remember coming home one day and I said to her, I was like, I can't see myself being around these people every day, but I can see myself hanging out on the corner every day. That's a problem, right?
Mm.
Yeah. And now I am one of these people, right?
Well, and that's the other part of it, right?
Yeah, it is. But that's what I was saying. I wasn't given, so I'll give you an example. When I progressed through my life in New Orleans, excuse me, Mississippi, I competed in these events, and it wasn't just science; it was also music, right? So if you compete, so I was going to the state science fair every year from a freshman in high school, all 4 years, right? And I was a good musician, right? I was always at the top of the tuba players in the state of Mississippi, all state band, all that jazz. And I had a group of white dudes, because there's only, out of 200 some odd students in the band in the all state level, there was only 7 black students in my era, right? 2 of them were female, 5 dudes. And uh, you see the same people who are the competitive ones. I had a crew of white dudes that I was their leader. They looked up to me, right? There were these other dudes who were, exactly what you would expect, kind of like the jocks nerds type of thing, right? They were like playing the jocks role, but in the band type thing, right? But yet, at the age of 24, when I leave Mississippi to go to Stanford, in my mind, I'm thinking all white people are racist. So how do you resolve those two things? I got a crew of white dudes who love me, but yet in my mind, I'm thinking, you know what I'm saying? So when you're young, you live in a different world, right? Than when you're older, more seasoned, more reasoned, right?
So, and also, like, I remember a conversation I had with Lenora Falani
Oh
around
yeah,
my experience when I went to graduate school. And I was having this thing of like, oh, I don't know why they treated me that way. I
yeah,
was something or other. And she's like, you don't understand racism. Right?
mm,
Like in the sense of the structural systems and the
yeah.
ways that you get put to the side, or how that
Oh,
cultural
put to the side is
moment
a
of not offering,
yeah,
of like seeing, we were talking in another session, person was talking about, hey, my friends, 2 white people, would have me go to the other side of the
mm,
store so that the cops in the stores would follow me so they could steal things. Right? Like, so
right,
there is a
right, right,
cultural element to what's
yeah,
happening. And I think us getting smarter and accepting the challenge in your story,
yeah.
right? I'm a black dude. I've got these white people who love me. I got to grapple with how I understand what racism is. And I think as
Right.
a
Yeah.
country, we
You buy
still
we
got to.
buy these narratives that aren't really, life is much more complex than the simple narratives that we're given, right? And once you realize that, like I say now when I talk to mentor people, and I mentor youth, I say I don't choose the people I interact with based on how they look. I choose it based on how they feel, right? And
Mhm.
so, you know, I could get punched in the face by 20 black dudes, right? But I never turn and say black people anything negative, right? But one, non-black person said something racist to me. Suddenly I'm like, bent out of shape,
Right.
and I'm like, oh, I'm gonna paint a whole community with that
And
bad experience, right? And so it's because you're kind of conditioned to think in those ways, right? And so when I realized that I can, learn how to interact in the world as individuals, and every human is an open book to be discovered, right? And
mm,
don't get me wrong, intuition works really great to to get to pull you closer or put you farther away. It
sure.
doesn't have to be some big analysis. But it's the whole idea of some feature of your identity makes you automatically a person I don't interact with, or a person I'm hesitant to interact with. Like that hasn't existed in my life this century, right? It
Right.
was very present in the 20th century, not at all in the 21st century.
I'm going to say one more thing, and then I'm going to ask everybody to either ask a question or say something that they've been thinking about since we've started. So one of the ways for the Freedom Festival and some other work that I've done is we look at what is it to create together. What is it
Yeah.
to build together? And that activity of doing things together, building the ensemble is then it goes it's not just the individual, it's what's going beyond us, right? So
Yeah.
that there's more that we can work with other than our individual, whether
Right.
identities, frailties, how we understand, how we tell stories.
And that's when you were introducing me, for example. You were like, "Oh, he did this, he did that, he did this." In my mind, I was thinking, I don't do anything alone ever, right? It's always a team of sort, like always, right? Yeah.
Yep. So I need some guest questioners or conversationalists. So if you would like to, if you have a thought you want to share, a question you want to ask, I would love for you to raise your hand. And if you can't raise your hand, you can do the giant wave here and we'll figure out how to get you in. But I really want it could be a comment, a question. We're a small group. We're provocative. Hello, the ink snake. Go ahead.
Hi, Hakeem. Thanks so much for sharing your story. And I'm curious about a lot of different things. And uh, so I'm thinking about uh what I something that Raquel is was pointing at and building on how you've I'm sure been paying attention to the news and the budget cuts that are coming.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've been thinking about is how do we continue to support our community, and whether that is the science community or the science education community, or some of the work that of finding you in Mississippi and pulling you to San Diego or Stanford or wherever, right? And like that's uh not easy work, and it's a lot harder uh than it took to get me out of my being raised by a civil engineer, doing a PhD in upstate New York, and then coming to Boston, right? That was a pretty straight path for me. Sounds like your path was a lot more convoluted. So I'm sorry, I'm mixing up a couple of different things. So one is, how do we continue to support our communities, given that the structures that we've been using so far are about to disappear?
The situation with the federal government is really tough. Like we're an innovation economy. And so the recommendation is to cut off the money spigot from the federal government those fundamental that fundamental work, and also cut off some of that access to Earth's brains. you know, it's like if I were the leader of a nation, I would want my people to be educated, safe, you know, these fundamental and healthy, right? Very fundamental things. And it seems like, this is not being thought through well from the investment in the future perspective, right? And so, what to do about it? I mean,
Thought
maybe
thought is doing a lot of work in that sentence.
r- right? Yeah, yeah.
Well,
That's not what it's. That's not the different set of objectives, perhaps. But what can we do about it? So, if this was earlier, I would say somehow talk to your representatives at the federal level to make sure, because what happens a lot is presidents propose these budgets with these massive cuts to science, but a lot of that science happens in the districts, all of it, right, that are spread around the country. So the Congress doesn't allow it to happen. All right. And now we have a different situation. So I was reading the New York Times this morning, and one of the articles had a title similar to, this particular party's legislatures feel that the higher priority is supporting their president over supporting the people they represent, right? Um, but a lot of those people who are, those are the businesses that are in it's not like this money is going directly into people's pockets, right? It's going to get work done. And so these are the contractors and the students and the professors and this whole economy. So, you know, having those decision makers influence to not let that go away would be the thing to do. Now we're kind of late in that particular process. I don't know if it's still as effective as it would have been earlier. I don't know the answer to that. But I'm telling you, it is a crisis, right? So I have so many high achieving friends who are like so true to the game, square, nerds, dedicated, massive hours, know everybody in the field, reached high levels in, federal agencies, now fired, right? So that makes the situation even more dire. So having never faced a situation like this, maybe we should ask AI.
Right.
AI.
Well, I wonder about like also the thing of creating outside of the institutions that we're familiar with. So
Well,
there's
getting a
ways.
flow of money in is such a hard thing, right? I mean, everything else is, to me, that flow of cash, it's a lot of money that's required.
Yeah.
Like,
For
well,
which
just for example, when you
instead of
read,
jumping people.
I was I had a position at NASA where I oversaw $45 million. That was 1% of the Science Mission Directorate's budget that was set aside for what the um, federal law requires NASA to do, which is also this education outreach component, right? Even though it's not called that anymore, it's called science activation. And that was $45 million a year that was going to, over 24 organizations around the country that are the highest performing at, SciAct. I was helping to create and run SciAct from 2017 through 2019. And, it's gone now. It's on pause. That's all. Think of all those organizations. These are your, flagship organizations. Now we're all in trouble, right?
Work to be done.
Yeah. Well, what fills in the gap?
We don't yet have an answer. What other questions and thoughts are people having? How was this? How is this? What is the impact of the conversation? Where are you? Fluid in here, carry your proof of citizenship on your person. And then Edion also leads NASA's neurodiversity network is another thing that's happening that's part of for this area.
So my Floridian friend, I was a professor at Florida Tech for many years. So I started in 2007, left in 2015 for a sabbatical at MIT, never went back. So
I mean, I wonder what you think about this, Hakeem, because so like my sanity comes from doing things that are in the institutions and things that are out.
yeah.
I never leave myself completely dependent upon what exists
Oh
as
yeah.
right. And so I think there's a lot that gets organized in how do we maintain what we have,
Mm-hmm.
right? Rather than how do we keep what is it to come together in this conversation, ask the question, what is it to,
Yeah.
reach across, I don't know which aisle, get rid of aisles. But so I
Yeah.
wonder, again, this doesn't address the question of what it is to have a job in the field, but how you think about what we create outside of our traditional institutions.
Yeah, yeah. So I've always been paranoid. I've always felt like you're going to fire me. So I've always had a side hustle from, the day my career started. And then somewhere around 2010, I read an article that said the average millionaire has 7 lines of income. And that really changed my life, right? So I left my day job, my safe day job, and have basically been a contractor the last decade, right? But they're all, high level-ish positions, but also have multiple hustles outside of those contract positions, right? I feel like, I kind of behave almost like someone that they describe from the Depression who hoards. In my case, it's like I don't trust institutions. I don't trust, right? So I have to make sure I'm taking care of myself. Because that's how I was in Mississippi as well as when we were young. You couldn't trust, getting a job at the local factory was damn near impossible for most people, right? That's why we're hunting, farming, fishing, hauling pulpwood, selling alcohol, bootlegging, selling weed. You're doing everything you can to survive and make it. And I think that, I've worked a lot in the developing world, and we do have a very comfortable society, and it's easier to make it here, right? Than say somewhere in a place that's at war, to go to the extreme. Um, so we're lucky in a way, right? We have first world problems, and so those opportunities for multiple hustles are always there. Now, people, there's a price that I pay, right? And that price is generally to be tolerated. I have to work super hard and overproduce, right? Because, yeah. So
Yeah.
I think that Americans tend to not see our opportunity and how good we have it. Uh, you know, um, and there it even though you're not going to exist in comfort, the idea that you should exist in comfort is a misunderstanding of the way existence typically works anyway, right? We've being a second half of the 20th century, early 21st century American is a very
Yeah.
sweet spot to have been born in history, time and space. So it's we're having troubles, but at the same time we got a lot of opportunities. So we just got to keep hustling. We got to keep showing up. If you want to help people like Hakeem's down in Mississippi, you got to show up, right? And any little thing you do matters. When you're not being seen by the world, and this one person shows up, you might be talking to a group of 50 people, right? I wasn't a kid in the front row, right? I was a kid who came in late and stood at the back, never spoke to the speaker, right? But I listened to them. And so if that person hadn't shown up, I would not have gotten that information I needed to go to the next step. So for those of us who are now in a more adult position where we have that knowledge, it's just put it out in the world, show up and put it out in the world however you can. And
Yeah.
somebody may be listening and somebody will be helped.
And that is a beautiful, beautiful closing to our time. Like seriously, it's the show up. Like and as we're creating and inviting and sharing and giving who we are or having opportunities, showing up, responding, reaching out, helping to create a hustle, whether it's yours or somebody else's. This is it's our time. It's our time to
Absolutely.
do it. It
Yeah.
is for us. And I think
We are the generation of now. This is us.
Yep. And it's a
Yeah.
beautiful invitation both to I think the one of the things of both not having is recognizing that you can have at the same
Mhm.
time. There's a mix of like, oh, I'm going to work with what I got, even if what I got is nothing. And now that we have a lot, different people have different things, let's still give and show up with what we can. And
Right.
Loretta, we're at that time. Are you gonna give me a closing statement, a provocation? How are you gonna help me out? I'm giving you it. I'm giving it.
Okay. Well, it's a pleasure to even hear your voice. I'm from the same area you're from. I'm from
No way.
Louisiana. I'm not
Yeah.
from Mississippi though.
Yeah.
I tried to avoid that place, but I'm from Louisiana. Grew up there. My background's a little different than yours. I didn't have the same kind of experience. However, um, I found what you're saying so beautiful, and as you were typing, because I don't know anything about astrophysics. So I was trying to find out the quest for Raquel's question about freedom. And so
Mhm.
I was writing in AI, this trying to understand. But what I understand is you were, how did it put it? Y- Through your chaos or the chaos that you experience in life, you were in search of freedom. And
Yeah.
really it was you that you were in search of. And you
Right.
came to find order through something that was predictable because your life was so unpredictable.
Mhm.
And I just find it so beautiful that you found freedom by
Mhm.
discovering yourself and discovering
Right.
what you love that was already within you. So
Mhm.
that's about it. I did reach out to
You
you
did
in
awesome.
LinkedIn.
Say that last line again,
you.
Loretta. What'd you
I
say?
just told him I reached out to
Good.
him and LinkedIn.
Thank you.
So blessings to you. Keep rising and staying beautiful.
No, Dan, I don't still DJ, but I will bust a rap. I
There you
will
go.
drop a rap.
We might go out with one. You all, this has been a wonderful session. Thank you for showing up. We have
You
two
too,
more.
Samaya. I see you.
We have a couple more sessions coming tomorrow. Again, the conversation of Frederick Douglass and the Declaration of Independence, an open mic of poetry on July 4th. There's a creative playground. The Freedom Festival is grassroots organized. It is you can donate to make sure that we continue to give free sessions away, conversations that we continue to build with. I am honored both by Hakeem, but you're all of y'all's presence, by far. Let's go out with some,
Thank you.
which is it, P Caddy or Machine? Either one. Let's see what Steven
Machine.
picks. Machine, there we go.
Or Curtis. You're welcome, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Karen, I didn't know you were here. All right, thank you.
Thank you. You'll see us online. There'll be a recording in a couple of weeks, if not before. See you soon.